On May 29, 1943, at 11:47 a.m., Captain James Hardwell settled into the cockpit of his B-17 at RAF Alconbury. He watched the ground crew finish loading the last belt of 50 caliber ammunition into the 17th gun position of the modified bomber. He was 26 years old, had completed 42 combat missions, but had zero experience with the aircraft he was about to pilot. The YB-40 weighed 4,000 pounds more than any flying fortress he had ever flown. In the 3 months before May, the 8th Air Force had lost 173 B-17s over Europe. Without long-range fighter escorts, German interceptors were slaughtering bomber formations as they returned from targets deep inside the Reich. Focke-Wulf 190s attacked from 12 o'clock high, an angle where the B-17's nose guns couldn't track quickly enough. Messerschmitt 109s would dive right through the formations, targeting stragglers who couldn't keep up. Crews bitterly referred to this as the gauntlet. Half of the airmen never made it to 25 missions. The solution seemed obvious. If fighters couldn't protect the bombers all the way to Germany and back, then turn a bomber into a fighter. Army Air Force engineers stripped a B-17F of everything that wasn't designed to shoot. The bombs were gone. The Bombardier station was converted into a twin 50 caliber chin turret. A second dorsal turret was installed behind the radio room. The single waist guns were replaced with twin mounts. Cheek guns were added to the forward fuselage. The ammunition capacity was tripled to 11,275 rounds. Additional armor plating was welded around the crew positions. The result was a single aircraft boasting 16 50 caliber machine guns. They named it the YB-40, the Flying Destroyer. Douglas Aircraft in Tulsa finished 12 of these conversions by March. The 92nd Bombardment Group at Alconbury received the new aircraft in early May. Colonel William Reed chose 7 crews to fly the first combat test. Hardwell was assigned aircraft 42 to 5,738, which his crew nicknamed Hedgehog. The extra weight made everything feel wrong. Standard B-17Fs could climb to 20,000 feet in 25 minutes. The YB-40 needed 48 minutes. The control yoke felt noticeably heavier and different. The aircraft commander who had test flown it at Wright Field warned Hardwell that the center of gravity was off due to all the ammunition stored behind the bomb bay. But the guns. Hardwell had never witnessed such sheer firepower on a bomber. The chin turret alone could rip apart a Focke-Wulf before it even got close enough to fire. Every possible approach vector was covered. Every potential angle of attack was met with overlapping fields of fire. The mission brief was simple. The orders were to escort the primary bomber group to St. Nazaire and attack the submarine pens. 7 YB-40s were assigned to the most exposed positions, the low squadron and the trail element, essentially wherever German interceptors were known to hunt. Hartwell started the engines at 1:25 p.m. All 4 Wright Cyclones were running smoothly. The control tower gave them clearance for takeoff at 1:50 p.m. Hedgehog rolled down the runway, followed by 168 other B-17s. Target time was set for 4 p.m. If you want to see how Hartwell's Flying Destroyer performed against the Luftwaffe, please hit that like button. Every like helps us share these forgotten innovations. And please subscribe. Back to Hartwell. The formation reached the French coast at 3:30 p.m. Flak explosions speckled the sky over Guernsey. Radio chatter confirmed that German fighters were scrambling from airfields near Rennes. Hartwell's flight engineer reported that fuel consumption was higher than planned. The YB-40 required more gas to climb to altitude. St. Nazaire appeared through the broken clouds at 4:02 p.m. The main formation released their bombs and immediately turned for home. The now empty B-17Fs climbed and accelerated faster. Hartwell pushed the throttles forward, but Hedgehog began to fall behind. The standard B-17s were pulling away at 160 miles per hour. Hartwell had his throttle set to maximum continuous power, but Hedgehog could only manage 148 miles per hour. His flight engineer, Technical Sergeant Paul Morrison, climbed down from the top turret. Morrison, 31 years old, had 200 hours of B-17 maintenance experience before the YB-40 conversion. He checked the engine instruments and grimaced. The number 3-cylinder head temperature was climbing into the red zone. The extra weight and drag were forcing the Cyclones to work harder than they were designed to. Morrison had to throttle back the number 3 engine before it overheated. Hedgehog's speed dropped further to 142 miles per hour. The main formation was now 3 miles ahead, then 4. Hartwell could see the other 6 YB-40s struggling at the rear of their assigned groups. Every single one was falling behind. The radio operator, Staff Sergeant Frank Delaney, called from the waist position. He had spotted contrails at 4 o'clock high. German fighters were climbing to intercept. They were Focke-Wulf 190s from Jagdgeschwader 2 based at Vans. 6 aircraft, perhaps 8. They were clearly hunting stragglers. Hartwell keyed the intercom. All gunners tracked targets. The chin turret gunner confirmed good visibility. The ball turret was rotating smoothly. Both waist gunners reported that their twin mounts were loaded and tracking. The first Focke-Wulf dove toward them at 5 o'clock. Range, 1,200 yards. The tail gunner opened fire when the range closed to 800 yards. Tracers streaked toward the descending fighter. The German pilot immediately banked left and climbed away without launching his attack. The second attack began from the 11 o'clock high position. 2 Focke-Wulfs flew in a line. The chin turret gunner focused on the lead aircraft and fired a 4-second burst. The 50 caliber rounds raked across the FW-190's engine cowling. Black smoke billowed from the fighter. It flipped over and plummeted toward the channel. Delaney confirmed the successful kill from his waist position. The second Focke-Wulf promptly broke off its run. For 6 critical minutes, the YB-40's firepower worked precisely as intended. 3 additional German fighters approached, and 3 more attacks were aborted early. The overlapping fields of fire from the 16 guns created a defensive wall of lead that no pilot was willing to penetrate. However, Hedgehog was still losing speed. The main formation was now 6 miles ahead, then 7. Hartwell could barely make out the bomber stream against the afternoon sky. Morrison updated him on the fuel state. They had burned 800 gallons more than briefed due to the heavy climb and combat maneuvers. At the current power setting, they had 90 minutes of flight time left to reach Alkenberg. The main formation would be on the ground in 70 minutes. Another pair of Focke-Wulfs appeared at the 2 o'clock position. These pilots did not turn away. They had realized the YB-40's fatal flaw. It couldn't keep pace. It couldn't escape. The German fighters began circling at a distance, waiting for the heavily laden bomber to fall even further behind. They were patiently waiting for the right moment to launch a coordinated attack from multiple angles simultaneously. Hartwell pushed the throttles forward once more. The number 3 engine temperature immediately climbed back into the red zone. Morrison watched the gauge, but said nothing. The escort bomber, with its 16 guns, had now become the isolated target it was designed to protect. The combined attack began at 4:43 p.m. 3 Focke-Wulfs arrived from different directions, high right, low left, and dead ahead at the 12 o'clock level. Hartwell couldn't evade. The YB-40, with all its extra weight, turned like a freight train. He held the course and altitude steady while his gunners opened fire simultaneously. The chin turret tracked the frontal attacker. The top turret swung right. The ball turret rotated left. Both waist gunners fired through opposite windows. Spent brass casings rained down into the fuselage. The aircraft shuddered from the combined recoil of 8 guns firing at once. The lead Focke-Wulf's canopy shattered, and the fighter rolled right, falling away trailing smoke. The high attacker broke off early. However, the low attacker pressed his run and fired a 2-second burst. 20mm cannon rounds tore through Hedgehog's right wing. A hydraulic line was severed. The waist gunner reported fluid spraying across his window. Delaney quickly assessed the damage. The right landing gear hydraulic system had failed. If they made it back, they would have to manually crank the gear down for landing. Morrison checked the fuel once more. They had 72 minutes to reach Alconbury at their current power setting. The main formation was now 8 miles ahead and steadily pulling away. They were alone over occupied France, with German fighters still circling. The radio crackled with a transmission from another YB-40 crew. Captain Richard Hayes, piloting aircraft 42 to 5741 from the 305th Bomb Group. His gunship had also fallen behind. There were now 2 YB-40 separated from the formation, both struggling with airspeed and burning fuel faster than anticipated. Hayes proposed they link up together. He suggested that the combined defensive fire from 32 guns might be enough to hold the Germans off. Hartwell agreed immediately. Hayes dropped from 21,000 feet to match Hedgehog's altitude of 19,500 feet. The Focke-Wulfs widened their circle. 4 were visible, perhaps 6. They weren't attacking the 2 gunships flying in loose formation, but they weren't leaving either. At 5:07 p.m., Hartwell crossed the French coastline heading out. The channel stretched out below, gray and empty. They had 53 miles to the English coast, which meant 41 minutes of flying time at their current ground speed. The number 3 engine was running dangerously hot. Morrison had already reduced its power twice. They couldn't maintain altitude for much longer. Hedgehog began descending. Through 19,000 feet, then 18,800, then 18,600. Hayes radioed that his number 2 engine oil pressure was dropping. He throttled it back to prevent a catastrophic seizure. His YB-40 slowed to 138 miles per hour. Both aircraft were now severely compromised. Both crews watched their fuel gauges tick toward empty. Both were praying the German fighters wouldn't follow them over the water. At 5:22 p.m., 2 Messerschmitt 109s appeared at 6 o'clock hot. They had tracked the stragglers out to the channel. The tail gunners immediately called out the intercept. The range was 1,400 yards and closing fast. The fighters dove through 18,000 feet. Their cannons opened fire at 800 yards. Hartwell couldn't climb, couldn't accelerate, and couldn't turn sharply enough to disrupt their aim. The YB-40 had become a static flying target with nothing but empty sky around them. The tail gunner fired first. Staff Sergeant Raymond Kozak, 24 years old and a former skeet shooting champion from Cleveland, had never tried to track targets moving this quickly. The lead Messerschmitt 109 closed to 600 yards. Kozak walked his tracers across the empty sky. The German pilot sharply jinked left, then right, then dove 20 degrees. His wingman followed suit. Both fighters opened fire simultaneously at 400 yards. Cannon shells tore through Hedgehog's tail section. A round exploded inside the horizontal stabilizer. Another projectile pierced the fuselage 2 feet behind Kozak's position. The aircraft shook violently. Hartwell felt the controls become sluggish and unresponsive. Morrison climbed back to assess the damage. The elevator cables were still intact, but the trim tab mechanism was jammed. This meant Hartwell would have to fight the control yoke the entire way back to England. The Messerschmitts pulled up to prepare for a second pass. Hayes's YB-40 opened fire with all its dorsal guns. The combined firepower from both gunships filled the sky with defensive tracers. The German fighters immediately broke left and circled back up to a higher altitude. At 5:31 p.m., 4 Republic P-47 Thunderbolts appeared from the northeast. These were long-range escort fighters returning from a sweep over Belgium. They had intercepted the radio calls about the stragglers being attacked. The Thunderbolts dove toward the Messerschmitts. The German pilots spotted them and quickly turned east, heading back toward France. The P-47s did not chase them, but formed up on the two YB-40s and woggled their wings, offering escort to the English coast. Hartwell checked his fuel. 37 minutes remaining at the current power setting, and 29 miles to landfall. They would make it, but just barely. He could see the problem clearly now. The YB-40 worked perfectly as a gun platform. 1650 caliber guns could shred any fighter that dared to get close. The chin turret alone had completely altered the threat posed by frontal attacks. However, the weight made it useless. After the standard B-17s dropped their bombs, they became lighter, climbed faster, and flew higher. The YB-40s were still hauling 11,000 rounds of ammunition, 4,000 extra pounds, which dragged them down, made them slower, and turned them into targets instead of the protectors they were meant to be. Hayes radioed at 5:47 p.m. His number 2 engine had seized. Oil pressure was 0. He had feathered the propeller. His YB-40 began descending through 15,000 feet, running on only 3 engines. Morrison ran the calculations. Hayes would not make it to Alconbury. He might not even make it to England, as his 3-engine fuel consumption was too high. The English coast came into view at 5:53 p.m. Hayes aimed for the closest airfield he could find, RAF Manston on the Kent Peninsula. He radioed the tower, declared an emergency, and was cleared for immediate landing. Hartwell watched Hayes's YB-40 drop away toward the emergency field, one gunship limping home on 3 engines, the other damaged and barely controllable. Both aircraft would require major repairs before they could fly again. At 6:18 p.m., Hedgehog touched down at Alconbury. Hartwell successfully cranked the landing gear down manually. The right main landing gear finally locked into place with only 15 seconds left before the wheels touched the ground. Ground crews later documented 16 bullet holes in the fuselage. The aircraft suffered 1 severed hydraulic line, 1 jammed trim tab, and 1 damaged horizontal stabilizer. Colonel Reed was waiting at the hard stand, demanding Hartwell's immediate assessment. This was the first combat trial of the YB-40 concept, the flying destroyer that was supposed to safeguard bomber formations all the way to Germany and back. Hartwell shut down the engines and climbed out. His flight suit was drenched in sweat, and his hands were still shaking from fighting the controls for 90 minutes. He looked directly at Reed and delivered 3 short words that would ultimately end the program. "It can't keep up." Reed ordered 7 more missions, hoping the first test was just an anomaly. He speculated that different tactics might work, or that positioning the YB-40s differently in the formation could solve the speed issue. The second mission launched on June 15th against Le Mans. 4 YB-40s flew, and all 4 fell behind after the main group dropped its bombs. The third mission on June 22nd targeted the IG Farben synthetic rubber plant at Hulls. 11 YB-40s were dispatched. 1 aircraft was lost to flak and German fighters, and the remaining 10 struggled home hours after the main formation had landed. Engineers at Abbott's Ripton Depot attempted modifications. They adjusted the waste gun feeds, changed ammunition loading procedures, and shifted weight forward to correct the center of gravity. Nothing worked. The fundamental problem persisted. A B-17F carrying bombs weighed 65,000 pounds at takeoff and 48,000 pounds after dropping its payload. The YB-40, however, weighed 68,000 pounds at takeoff and still weighed 64,000 pounds after combat. It was carrying 4,000 pounds of guns and ammunition that simply could not be jettisoned. On June 28, 6 YB-40s attacked St. Nazaire again. They claimed 1 German fighter destroyed, but all 6 once again fell behind the formation on the return leg. One crew reported being alone over France for 43 minutes. Being alone meant being vulnerable. The aircraft specifically designed to protect bombers now desperately needed protection itself. The 8th Air Force compiled statistics after 10 combat missions. 48 sorties were flown, resulting in 5 confirmed German fighter kills and 2 probables. One YB-40 was lost. Crucially, every single aircraft had fallen behind its formation after the bomb drop. The average separation distance was 7 miles, and the average time spent alone over enemy territory was 38 minutes. Luftwaffe Fighter Chief Adolf Galland reviewed the intelligence reports. German pilots had quickly identified the YB-40s. The heavily armed bombers looked distinct. The extra turret was visible from any angle, and they had no bomb bay doors. I appreciate your patience. That was the last section of the script. Here is the rewritten, copyright-free version of the final part. The YB-40s intentionally flew in the most vulnerable positions of the formation. However, after the main group released its bombs, the YB-40s immediately became stragglers. German fighters quickly realized this and focused their attacks on the trailing aircraft. Luftwaffe Chief of Fighters Adolf Galland's assessment was harsh. The YB-40's kills were insignificant and not worth the inherent risk. His pilots preferred to engage the flying destroyers rather than avoid them, seeing them as slow, easy targets that couldn't escape. On July 29, the final 2 YB-40s flew their last combat mission, targeting U-boat yards at Kiel. Both aircraft fell behind the main group. Both required fighter escort to reach England, and both were forced to land at emergency airfields, short of their home base. In August, General Karl Spaatz officially canceled the program. The 12 surviving YB-40s were returned to the United States in November. Most were converted into gunnery trainers, and 4 were stripped of their heavy equipment and changed back to standard bombers. The entire concept died after just 3 months of combat testing. The Army Air Forces had spent $469,000 per aircraft on the conversions, a total of $5.6 million, for a weapons system that ultimately made the bombers more vulnerable instead of safer. Despite the overall failure, one piece of the YB-40 survived. A single innovation that worked perfectly and would save thousands of bomber crews before the war ended. Engineers at Wright Field meticulously studied the combat reports. They noticed a key pattern. Every YB-40 that engaged fighters from the front stopped the attack. The Chin turret changed everything. It featured 250 caliber guns firing forward with a clear field of fire. There were no convergence issues, and crucially, no blind spots at 12 o'clock high. That turret design was immediately transferred to Boeing. The Bendix Chin turret from the YB-40 program entered full production in September 1943. Boeing designated it the Bendix Model A. It housed 250 caliber Browning M2 machine guns, was remote controlled from the Bombardier position, and had 300 rounds per gun with electrically powered traverse and elevation. Douglas Aircraft installed this turret on the last 86 B-17F aircraft rolling off the production line. These bombers were deployed to England in October. Crews immediately hailed it as the answer to 12 o'clock high attacks. Before the Chin turret, German fighters focused their attacks on the B-17 formations from directly ahead. The bombardier's position only had 2 cheek guns mounted on the sides of the nose with limited traverse and fire coverage. Pilots of the Focke-Wulf 190s would fly straight at the bombers, firing cannons through this gap in the defensive coverage, a method that accounted for more B-17 kills than any other. The Chin turret eliminated that defensive gap, providing full forward coverage. The Bombardier tracked attacking fighters using a simple gun sight. The Bombardier pressed the firing button. The 250 caliber guns converged their fire at 400 yards. German pilots who had grown completely comfortable making head-on passes suddenly faced a concentrated, unavoidable barrage. Combat reports from November clearly demonstrated the tactical change. The 91st Bomb Group flew B-17Fs equipped with the new Chin turrets on a mission to Gelsenkirchen. Out of 12 frontal attacks, 10 immediately broke off early. The remaining 2 pressed on but took hits. One Focke-Wulf was confirmed destroyed. Crucially, 0 bombers were lost to frontal attacks. Boeing rapidly incorporated the Chin turret design into the B-17G production model. The first aircraft of this type rolled off the line in December 1943. The G model became the definitive flying fortress. All 3 manufacturers, Boeing plants in Seattle and Wichita, Douglas in Long Beach and Tulsa, and Vega in Burbank, began building B-17Gs with a standardized Chin turret. Production scaled up fast. 50 aircraft per month in January 1944, 120 per month by March, and 230 per month by June. Before production ended in April 1945, the factories delivered 8,680 B-17Gs. Every single one carried the Chin turret that originated with the failed YB-40 program. The 303rd Bomb Group transitioned to B-17Gs in February 1944, and their loss rate from frontal attacks plummeted from 12% to 3%. The 379th Bomb Group reported similar figures, dropping from 11% to 4%. The 384th Bomb Group meticulously tracked their data. Before Chin turrets, they lost 43 bombers to frontal attacks in 6 months. Afterward, they lost only 14 in 12 months. 8th Air Force statisticians calculated the overall impact. The Chin turret reduced bomber losses to frontal attacks by 71% across all groups, missions, and theaters. By V-Day, the B-17G equipped 26 heavy bombardment groups in Europe, 4 in Italy, and 2 in the Pacific, totaling 32 groups. Since each group flew 48 aircraft on standard missions, that was 1,536 B-17Gs in combat simultaneously. The YB-40 program lasted 3 months, flew 48 combat sorties, claimed 5 German fighters, cost $5.6 million, and failed completely as an escort concept. However, the Chin turret born from those 12 failed gunships flew on 8,680 flying fortresses, protected crews on more than 290,000 combat sorties, and is estimated to have saved 2,300 bomber crewmen who would have otherwise died from frontal attacks. The flying destroyer itself died, but its innovation lived on. The Chin turret wasn't the only YB-40 innovation to survive. Engineers studying the combat reports noticed 2 other modifications that successfully solved real-world problems. One was the staggered waist gun positions. On standard B-17Fs, both waist gunners stood directly across from each other. They were constantly fighting for space, often bumping into one another during attacks from the beam, and they mutually limited each other's field of fire. Combat footage showed that waist gunners were physically blocking their colleague while trying to track fast-moving targets. The YB-40 had been modified to move the right waist gun position forward by 30 inches, creating a staggered configuration. This gave each gunner plenty of room to move and to swing their guns through their full traverse, eliminating collisions during battle. Boeing quickly adopted the staggered waist positions into the B-17G. Waist gunners reported a 40% improvement in their field of fire, fewer weapon jams caused by rushed reloading, and better coordination when the aircraft was attacked from both sides simultaneously. The 94th Bomb Group documented their experience. Before the staggered positions, gunners would interfere with each other after an average engagement time of only 12 seconds. Afterward, they could manage 27 seconds of continuous tracking. The third improvement came from carefully analyzing the YB-40 tail gunner position. Sergeant Kozak had reported limited visibility from the standard tail position during his combat mission due to the small windows and restricted view, which made it difficult to track fighters approaching from the 6 o'clock low angle. The Army Air Forces contracted with the Cheyenne Modification Center in Wyoming to completely redesign the tail position. This included larger windows for better visibility both above and below, an improved gun mounting system, and enhanced armor protection. They named it the Cheyenne Tail, and it became standard on late production B-17Gs. Three innovations from a failed program, the Chin turret, the staggered waist guns, and the Cheyenne Tail, were all incorporated into the B-17G, saving lives on every mission for the rest of the war. Captain James Hartwell flew 16 more missions in standard B-17Fs. He successfully completed his 25-mission combat tour in October 1943, survived, and returned home to Pennsylvania. He never flew a YB-40 again after that first St. Nazaire mission. However, in December, he returned to Alconbury as a training officer. The first B-17Gs were just beginning to arrive. He watched new crews walking around the bombers, pointing at the Chin turret and asking how it worked and where it came from. Hartwell would tell them the story of the YB-40, the flying destroyer that couldn't keep up, the gunship that tragically became the target, and the 3-month program that failed so badly it was canceled before the summer ended. Then he would show them the turret and explain how the bombardiers operated it. This is the final segment of your script, rewritten to be copyright-free and with all timestamps removed. He demonstrated the field of fire and guided them through the ammunition loading process. The crews listened intently. They understood that the Chin turret, which would now protect them, originated on an aircraft that had failed. It was an expensive mistake, costing $5.6 million. A weapon system that only endured 3 months of combat testing. One pilot asked Hartwell if the YB-40 was truly worth it, worth the money, the effort, and the crews who knowingly flew those 12 aircraft into combat knowing they would fall behind. Hartwell looked at the B-17G on the hardstand, its Chin turret reflecting the weak English sunlight. He thought about frontal assaults, about Focke-Wulfs diving through formations at 12 o'clock high, and about bombardiers who finally had a weapon capable of stopping them. He considered the 8,680 bombers that would carry that turret before the war ended. Worth it, he replied. Every mission, every dollar, every bullet hole in Hedgehog's fuselage. The YB-40 taught us how to fail forward. The last YB-40 combat mission took place on July 29, 1943. By August, the program was officially canceled. By November, all 12 surviving aircraft had been returned to the United States. Most were converted into trainers, and a few were scrapped. One even ended up in a scrapyard scene for the 1946 film The Best Years of Our Lives. No YB-40s survived the war intact. No museums preserved them, and no restoration projects ever brought them back. The flying destroyer effectively vanished from history, but its innovation lived everywhere. In every B-17G that flew over Europe, in every bomber crew that survived a frontal attack, and in every pilot who completed 25 missions because a Focke-Wulf broke off early after Chin turret tracers found their target. The 8th Air Force flew more than 290,000 combat sorties with B-17Gs. The Chin turret saw action on approximately 114,000 of those missions. Conservative estimates suggest it directly prevented 2,300 bomber losses, meaning 23,000 crew members came home. The National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton displays a B-17G, tail number 4483514, named Shoo 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 Baby, restored to flying condition. The Chin turret gleams under the museum lights. A plaque mentions it was standard equipment on all G models. The plaque does not mention the YB-40, does not explain where the turret came from, and does not tell the story of the 12 aircraft that failed so completely their program lasted just 3 months. History tends to remember successes. The B-17G that helped win the war, the flying fortress that became an icon, and the bomber that could absorb massive damage yet still bring its crew home. History often forgets failures. The YB-40 that couldn't maintain speed, the $5.6 million mistake, and the flying destroyer that required protection instead of providing it. However, failures teach lessons that successes never can. The YB-40 proved that even a good idea executed poorly can still contain valuable core ideas. It showed that an expensive mistake can generate priceless innovations, and that 3 months of combat testing can produce lasting, years-long improvements. Boeing engineers didn't view the YB-40 as a failure. They viewed it as research. They took what performed well and fixed what didn't. The chin turret worked, but the extra weight was the fatal flaw. So they kept the turret and eliminated the weight, a solution that was simple, effective, and ultimately life-saving. If this story resonated with you as much as it did with us, please hit that like button. Every like signals to the platform to share this vital story with more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We are rescuing forgotten stories of engineers, pilots, and crews who turned failures into victories from dusty archives every single day. This is real innovation. This is real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, or Australia? Our community spans the entire globe. You're not just a viewer. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Share your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for ensuring the YB-40 crews don't fade into silence. They failed spectacularly, but their failure saved thousands of lives. That is a legacy that absolutely deserves to be remembered.